Hello guys, welcome back to Matthew Vinyl, and in today's video I'll be showing you my Beatles album vinyl collection. So I'll be doing two parts of this video. The first part is me showing off the LPs, and in the next video I'll be showing my EPs and singles. As you can see, a lot of my collection has been brought down. Those two shelves occupy pretty much all my Beatles LPs. As you can see, it's quite empty, so I've got a lot to go through. We're starting with Please Please Me. Now you think this is a weird cover. This is a Japanese red vinyl 1969 reissue on Apple. That's the record there. Of course, I keep my Japanese records like this. I'll show you the back cover if you're interested. It's just Beatles performing on the Ed Sullivan Show, I believe there. And basically this LP is like a little booklet and has photos of the group. Next up, we have another copy of Please Please Me. This is a UK 1976 stereo reissue in Parlophone. Of course, it looks pretty identical to an original, of course, but with no flipbacks. Next up, we have a 2009 Please Please Me remaster. This is a 2012 pressing on vinyl, and it does recreate the original Parlophone gold label. Next up, we have Introducing the Beatles, of course, the most bootlegged album ever, I believe, and mine is a US copy, of course, but mine is not official. Mine is a bootleg. As you can see on the label, the Beatles is below the spindle hole, so mine is not an original, but it's still nice to have regardless. Next up, we have a pretty beat up copy of With the Beatles. This is an original UK issue. I got this on eBay a few years ago for quite cheap. I'll show you the label real quick. That is it there. And we have another copy. This is a Canadian issue. Mine is a 1966 reissue, I believe. As you can see, it's pretty similar to the UK cover. Of course, it has Beatlemania there with the Beatles, and it has some text there from some newspapers and stuff like that. And the back is pretty identical to the UK issue. And of course, it is on the rainbow Canadian capital label. And next up, we have another copy. This is a Japanese 1970s reissue. I think it's 1976, I believe. That's it there. It does come with some inserts. Sorry about the glare there, but that is it there. Next up, we have another Canadian LP. This is Twist and Shout from 1963. It is pretty similar to the Please Please Me track list. Next up, I do not have the cover for this pressing, and it isn't even the correct sleeve. But I bought some Discogs when I first started collecting records back in 2020. And this is the Meet the Beatles LP from 1964, of course. That's it there. Next up, we do have one which I do have the cover with. This is a 1970s reissue, US, and it is on the Apple label. There's my Meet the Beatles there. Next up, we have the Japanese Meet the Beatles, but this is a different track listing to the American one. This is an original 1964 issue on red vinyl, released on Odeon, of course. That's it there. Next up, we have one of my favourite albums. It is A Hard Day's Night. This is an original UK mono pressing. There you go there. Next up, we have a 1970s Japanese reissue, of course, with an alternative cover, and it does have the Obi strip there, and it is on Apple, of course. Next up, we have another Hard Day's Night. This is from the USSR, just before the Soviet Union fell, and it is on this white label. Of course, this is official release by EMI. It does omit one track, When I Get Home, that is not present on this LP. Next up, we have a 2017 reissue stereo. This is from the Giagostini series. This is one of the first records I ever bought when I started collecting 4 years ago. For this next one, I do not own the cover again, unfortunately, but I do have the disc. It is the American United Artists, A Hard Day's Night. This is a second pressing, I believe. It is pretty beat up, but it still plays quite well. I don't really mind. You can see there's some dirt on it and just have some scratches on it, but it still plays through fine. Next up, we have the Beatles' second album, of course. This is from the US, and mine is an original copy, and that is the back cover there. Next up, we have the Japanese Beatles' second album. Of course, it also has a different track listing to the US one. and it is again on that nice red Odeon vinyl. Next up we have Hear the Beatles Tell All. This is a 1980s reissue, I believe, so it's not an original, but it's still interesting to have this interview record. Next up we have a German pressing of the Beatles Something New. Of course, in Germany most Beatles records were the UK issues, but they did issue some of the American LPs. And staying with that album, we have the US 70s Apple pressing of Something New. There you go, in stereo. Next up we have an original copy of the Beatles Story, of course a 2 LP set of the Beatles interviews. Next up we have a UK mono pressing of Beatles for Sale. Of course it is a little gatefold and the record is on here. There it is. Show you the back. There's the back there. And again, staying with that album, I have a Japanese issue. This is just like the British one, no differences here. And it does actually have a pretty similar gatefold here. There you go. Next up, we have another Russian pressing. This came out in the early 90s. Of course, it looks pretty different to the record there, but the back cover is just them all in Russian. I'll show you the back cover. As you can see, these Russian ones are very light cardboard. But you see there's a pretty weird image of the Beatles there, of course, but there you go. And then we've got another copy. We have got a US issue from the, I think this is from the early 90s, yeah? Something like that, the early 90s, late 80s, when the catalogue was standardised, of course, across the world to release the British releases. So this is a US copy, and it is on Capitol, but it does show the Apple and Parlophone label on that as well. Next up we have Beatles 65. This is an original US stereo copy. That's it there. And staying with that album, we have another issue. This is a 70s Apple copy. So it's pretty much the same as the last one I showed. Next up, we have the early Beatles. This is from Canada, from the 80s. This is an 80s reissue. And I believe it's on a purple, yeah, it's on a little purple Capitol label. Next up, we have Beatles Greatest. This is a Dutch compilation from the early 70s. And my copy is on nice gold vinyl. There was black, there was purple, I think there was blue and green as well, but there you go, and I'll show you the track listing right there. So you can see that fine. And next up we go back to Japan with Beatles number 5. Of course this uses the Beatles 65 cover. And the back cover is that there. And I'll show you the label so you can see the track listing. That is side 1. Hopefully you can see that fine. And this is side 2. Again, hopefully you can see that. You can pause if you need to. I do also own the Obi strip, but unfortunately it has came off there, so I just keep it safely packaged inside the sleeve. Next up we have an original mono pressing of Help from the UK. Unfortunately the cover is pretty beat up, and of course it isn't in the greatest of conditions, and the disc as well is in pretty poor condition, but I got it for quite cheap, so I thought why not pick it up. Next up we have a US copy of the Help LP. Of course this included all the tracks from the film of the same name. There you go, it's on the Capitol. It's an original 1965 issue. Next up we have another Japanese early 70s copy of Help. This is on Apple, and it does have the red vinyl. And the sleeve is pretty interesting. It is the UK track listing, and it does of course use the British cover with a little bit of difference at the top, but also has the US cover as well, from the back cover of the US one there. And it is a gatefold. There's the gatefold there. It does come with some inserts, but again I won't be showing them to save some time. We have a 2003 Japanese issue of Help. It does have the 70s Parlophone label. Yeah, it's from 2003. It's digital remaster and it does sound really good. Next up we have a modern 2009 remaster on 2012 vinyl of Help. I don't play this at all, but it does skip, so I was going to sell it on, but I'm not going to sell a faulty record to anyone. Next up, we have the Beatles in Italy. Now, this is not a live album as how it looks. This is just a compilation of those tracks there, and mine is a Dutch 80s pressing. And of course, if you are Greek, you will recognise this cover. This was the alternative cover to Rubber Soul in Greece, but it is used as the back cover here. Next up, we have Beatles 6. Again, I do not own the cover for this, unfortunately, so I do have to put it in a white plain sleeve. This is an original US copy. But however, we do have a Canadian 70s reissue, which I do have the cover, thankfully. And it is on that capital label. Next up, we have a Japanese 70s copy of Rubber Soul on Apple, and again on that nice red vinyl. Now, in my opinion, this copy sounds really nice. It's one of the best sounding copies of Rubber Soul I've ever heard. Next up, we have another Russian copy from the 90s. It's from 1991. Again, it is very flimsy, and of course it does have those images of the Beatles there, and it is on this Russian label. Next up, we have a US copy of Rubber Soul. Personally, this is the best Capitol album there was, even though it does have a few tracks off, but it works really well. It's a good version. Next up, we have Yesterday and Today. This is an original US, however, it is not a butcher cover. I've checked countless times, it is not a butcher cover, unfortunately, but I'm still happy to have the LP regardless. Staying with this LP, we have a 70s Apple reissue. Fortunately, on I'm Only Sleeping, yes, I'm Only Sleeping, there's a big scratch on that song, so unfortunately in this copy it skips, but apart from that it's in wonderful condition. Next up, we have a 70s Japanese copy of Revolver on the Apple label on the red vinyl again. It has, does have the normal back cover. Of course, this is a nice sounding stereo Japanese issue from the 70s. And next up, we've got another copy of Revolver, but this one I hardly ever play. I don't think I've played this for a long time, but this is a US copy. Of course, it has some tracks missing, so to me, there's not much point in playing it, but I do own it because, I did want to complete the Capitol series. And next up, we have the Beatles Oldies But Goldies, of course, the UK compilation that came out just after Revolver and just before Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and has the photo of the Beatles there whilst they were in Japan. And the track listing is right there. Hopefully you can see that. Sorry about the glare there. And we have another copy, but this is a Japanese one. And again, Apple label on the nice red vinyl. Now, as you can see, it has the same back cover, but the Japanese had actually corrected this cover. This is the UK one for comparison. Because of the Japanese words that is on Paul's top there, the Japanese had realised that it was the wrong way around on the British one, so they flipped the image around and corrected it to what it should look like. And now next up we have Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, of course one of the most famous Beatles albums of all time. This is an original UK issue. It is in pretty beat up condition sleeve wise. It has none of the inserts. There's the gatefold there, but the vinyl is in lovely condition. So the record player is nice. It does have some scratches on it. Now, next up we have an original Japanese issue on Odeon. Just pull that's it, there's a nice red vinyl again. And of course, has the normal back cover. Next up we have this Russian copy, which you will be able to see some differences. There's a new man there. I think he owns that label, Melodia. And you have a super fan there from Russia. The text has changed there, and even on the Welcome the Rolling Stones one there as well. And it is not just Peppers, it is backed with Revolver, and of course it does have a bunch of other images there as well that is changed from the original cover. It is of course a gatefold, and it does include the track list in Russian to Revolver and Peppers. Next up, we have a US 70s Apple pressing of the same album. Nothing too special there. Next up, we have the 2017 remix for the anniversary. Mine is a 2019 copy, but it has no difference to the 2017 one. Next up, we have Magical Mystery Tour. This is a Japanese 70s reissue on Apple. It's in the most mint condition I've ever seen in my life, and it sounds really good. Next up, we have a US 70s Apple pressing. Of course, again, nothing too special here. Then next up, we have this German 70s Hortzu reissue on the Apple label. Now this has, I got recommended this by Parlogram, of course. If you haven't seen them before, definitely give them a watch. If you want more information, just watch this video on it. But there you go. Next up, we have Magical Mystery Tour again, but this is the Russian copy. And it is backed with Yellow Submarine. Of course, they have been redrawn and translated into Russian. That is the cover. It's basically just the normal back covers and stuff like that, but into Russian. Next up, we have the White Album. This is a US 1970 reissue, so again, nothing too special there. Next up, we have a Flag Series Japanese reissue from the 70s. Unfortunately, I don't actually own the vinyl. When I bought this a few years ago in Discogs from Germany, the seller sent me this, but I had the wrong discs. It actually had a rare German 80s pressing. I later sold those discs, but I do not own the vinyl, so I just have the sleeve here. Maybe one day I'll get it framed. Next up, we have the 2018 anniversary pressing of the White Album, of course, the Giles Martin remix, which in my opinion sounds really good. I like the way it sounds. Next up, we have an original US stereo copy of Yellow Submarine. Of course, not everyone's favourite album. Does have some good tracks on it though, like Hey Bulldog and Only a Northern Song, in my opinion. They're quite good. Next up, we have a Japanese 70s reissue on Apple. Sounds really good, this pressing. Next up, we have a Japanese original on red vinyl of Abbey Road, of course. That's it, the label there. I'll show you the back cover. It looks pretty much the same. There you go. Next up, we have a US 1969 original of Abbey Road. There you go there. Next up, we have a 2019 50th anniversary of Abbey Road, of course, with the Giles Martin remix. Next up, we have a US Let It Be from 1970, of course. Since it was a US copy, it is on the red Apple label, which in my opinion I find quite interesting, because obviously nearly everything was on green, of course, but it is nice to have a little different version. Of course, it is a gatefold. Next up, we have the Japanese Flag Series 70s issue. Now this follows pretty much the UK. It's got the UK flag there, and it does have the red apple on the back, and it also does have the US gatefold, even though it's meant to be the British pressing. Well, the British version, not pressing. But this is the Japanese Flag Series from the 70s. Next up, we have another Russian Let It Be. Of course, the text on Let It Be is different, and the back cover, again, it's in that floppy sleeve. There you go there. Next up, we have the 2009 Let It Be reissue on the 2012 vinyl. Next up, we have a forgotten Beatles album. This is Hey Jude or The Beatles Again. My copy is a French copy from 1970. It does not include the track list on this, but it is on the labels. Next up, we have the Beatles Christmas album. This is a bootleg. This is not an official release. I bought this on eBay when I first started to collect records. It is on a red vinyl. Of course, this includes all their flexi discs that they released in the 60s. If you were in the Beatles fan club of their Christmas messages from 63 to 69. Next up, we have the Essential Beatles. So the glare there with the sleeve. This is an Australian and New Zealand compilation that came out just before the Red and Blue albums. And that is the side one there. This is an Australian release. This is a reissue from the 70s, I believe. And there you go. Hopefully you can see that fine. And on the back it goes through all the years. Of course, all these songs were hits in Australia and New Zealand. Next up, of course, we have the Red album. This is an original UK issue. And then we also have the 2014 reissue, of course, that is it there. We have an original UK copy of the Blue album, of course. And then we have the 2014 pressing again. Next up, we have the Beatles Rock and Roll Music. This is the Music for Pleasure reissue from the 76, I think it is from, or 80s, early 80s, something like that. And that's the track list in there. That's volume 1, and then here is volume 2. Next up, we have the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. This is, of course, a UK issue from the 70s, of course. There's the gatefold there, and there's the track list in there. And then we have another copy. This is a Japanese issue. It does have the exact same gatefold and everything, so it's pretty identical to the UK issue. Next up, we have the Beatles Live in Hamburg of 1962, of course. And that is the track list in there. Hopefully you can see all of that. Next up, we have the UK Rarities album. I don't have the box set that this originally came in, I just have it separate, of course. Next up, we have Beatles Love Songs. Of course, this is a UK issue. There's a nice gatefold there, and I'm not sure if you can see the track listing, but this has the Beatles Love Songs in it. Next up, we have the Beatles Ballads. Of course, this was meant to be the White Album cover. Thankfully, it was changed because this is awful, this cover. And there's the back there. Again, hopefully you can read that fine. Next up, we have the US Rarities, which in my opinion is better than the UK Rarities. Hopefully you can see the songs there again. If you need to read it, just pause it and hopefully you can. And there is the gatefold. Of course, it does have the Yesterday and Today Butcher cover right there. Next up, we have the Beatles Real Music. Of course, these are some other songs that were in the Beatles films. There you go. The track listing is there. Next up, we have Past Masters. This is a 2012 reissue. Disc 1 is on Parlophone and Disc 2 is on Apple. It does come with this nice gatefold. Next up, we have this another Russian compilation. It is called Taste of Honey. As the White Album photos there, all the songs are from Please Please Me, With the Beatles on a Hard Day's Night. And I think Beatles for Sale, yep, it goes up to Beatles for Sale as well. Next up, we have the Beatles and Tony Sheridan. This is a French pressing from the 70s. Of course, this includes songs that the Beatles recorded with Tony Sheridan whilst they were in Germany. Next up, we have the Beatles at the BBC Volume 1. This is from the 90s, this pressing. This is an original 90s copy. Next up, we have Anthology 1. This, of course, is another original 90s vinyl pressing. And then we have Anthology 2, again, another original 90s pressing. And then, of course, Anthology 3, again, another 90s pressing. Next up, we have the Beatles 1, of course, one of the best-selling albums, well, compilations anyways, of the 2000s. It has all their number ones from the US and the UK. Next up, we have the Beatles Love, of course, which is a nice listen every once in a while. Next up, we have the Beatles at the BBC Volume 2. No, this is a 2017 reissue. There you go. Next up, we have a little unofficial release. It's the Beatles' first single. It does include Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. And then it also includes the original versions of songs that the Beatles covered. So there you go. Next up, we have the Beatles Mono Masters. Of course, this came out in 2014. That's it there. So it's all the mono versions of those songs. Next up, we have the Decca Tapes. Of course, this is a unofficial release. Only a few of these songs have been officially released on the anthology. It does come in a nice little gatefold there. Next up, we have another bootleg. This is the Beatles' Lost Abbey Road tape from 1962 to 1964. That's the track list in there. It is on clear vinyl. It's on the Coda label from, I think, 2017. I think this is from. Next up, we have the Beatles live at the Liverpool Empire on December 7th, 1963. This is on the 1960s Records label, and they basically just reissue 60s artists from their live recordings and like from concerts or radio, you know, stuff like that. And staying with that label, we have the Beatles live in Adelaide on June 12th, 1964. Of course, it does have Jimmy Nicol there, and that is the track listing. Next up, we have this another bootleg. This is the Beatles live in Sweden from 1963. Yep, it's one-sided, so the back of this has no grooves in it, so you can touch that fine. Mine is 132 out of 300 copies. Fortunately guys, I lost the footage for this little part of the video. It's only for 3 releases, so it won't be too long. But I do have this record here, as you can see on screen. It is the Beatles live at Budokan Hall in Tokyo. I also own this Melbourne, Beatles live in Melbourne, and this Beatles Red Album Years. So now guys, we're on the box set part of this video, and the first box set is the Revolver box set from 2022. Of course, this is the remixed album. It includes the brand new stereo mix, the original mono mix, and outtakes, stuff like that. It does come with a nice huge book. I do still have the original shrink wrap there for mine. I'll put it in there. Now this is the stereo remix. Now this is the outtakes, has a nice alternative cover there, and then that's the gatefold, and the track listing is there. It does come with a 7-inch EP of stereo mixes of Paperback Writer and Rain, and the other side is the mono mixes. It's a nice little recreation of the Parlophone. However, it would have been nicer if it came from the top and not from the side, but it's still nice. And then we have the mono version. And next up, we of course have the White Album 2018 anniversary box set on vinyl, of course, and it has the 2018 stereo mix of the original album, and it has the Escher demos there. It comes with a little booklet here. There you go. So it does come with the original poster from the original LP, and then that is the first one. And these other Escher demos there, and I'll just show you one disc. It does have a nice Apple custom recording label, which I do really like to see. And next up, we have the Abbey Road box set from 2019. Again, similar things. Side 1 and side 2 is the original album, but the new mix, and then the other sides are outtakes from sessions and stuff like that, so quite cool. I'm not going to show all of this one because you have an idea of what's in it. There's no different labels this time, all of them are on the standard Apple label. Next up, we have the Let It Be box set. Let It Be and the Revolver one are my favourites out of these new mixes and box sets. Just come in this nice book, which you can show anyway in the little window thing. Then we've got the original LP, got the new remaster, got the Apple Sessions, Rehearsals and Apple Jams. Then we've got the Get Back LP. And of course in this Apple sleeve we get the 12-inch EP, which has Across the Universe, Unreleased Glenn Johns mix, I'm Your Wine, Glenn Johns mix, and then Don't Let Me Down, new mix of the original single, and then Let It Be, the same thing, the new mix of the original single. Thanks for watching the video guys. That was the end of part 1 of my Beatles vinyl collection. On Sunday there will be part 2 where I'll be showing my EPs and singles, so please look forward for that. However, if there's any other artist in my collection that you'd like to see, please drop down a name in the comments below, and if I have them I'll definitely make that video sometime in the future. But anyways guys, again, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and peace.